The Wendigo explained, the spirit of winter and unending human hunger. We are told stories of the Wendigo, a monstrous, emaciated beast that haunts the frozen northern forests. A creature of immense size and terrifying speed, with a heart of ice and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. It is the stuff of campfire nightmares, a simple boogeyman to warn against the dangers of the winter woods. But what if the Wendigo is not a beast at all? What if it is a spirit, a malevolent, elemental force born of the cold, the wind, and the gnawing, desperate hunger of a starving winter? And what if its greatest horror is not that it can hunt you, but that it can infect you? What if the Wendigo is not a monster you encounter, but the monster you become when your humanity finally starves to death? Today, we journey into the great, silent, snow-covered forests of the north, where the line between desperation and monstrosity is tragically thin. This is not just a story of a creature. It is the story of a spiritual plague, a curse born from the ultimate human taboo, a tale of how the hunger for survival can transform a man into a vessel for a hunger that can never be satisfied. Welcome to Mythos Unveiled. Today, we seek to explain the Wendigo, not as a monster that hunts men, but as the spirit of winter that hollows them out from the inside. Part 1. The Breath of Winter, the Genesis of Hunger. To understand the Wendigo, we must first abandon our modern, cinematic notions of monsters. We must set aside the image of a simple beast of tooth and claw, a creature to be hunted and slain. The truth is far more ethereal, more insidious, and more deeply tied to the very land from which the legend springs. A land where the line between the physical and the spiritual is not just thin, but often non-existent. This is not a creature of flesh and blood in the way we understand it. It is an Atusu, a spirit in the cosmology of the Algonquin-speaking peoples of North America, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Saulteaux, and the Innu. It is not something that is simply born. It is something that is awakened. And its cradle, its ancient and patient birthing ground, is the harshest and most unforgiving of all environments. The deep, brutal, and seemingly endless winter of the great northern forests, the taiga. Imagine a time before the comforting certainty of cities, before the reassuring lines of roads, before the profound luxury of a guaranteed meal. Imagine a small family unit or a hunting party, isolated by hundreds of miles of unforgiving wilderness. It is a world of profound, cathedral-like silence, a silence broken only by the sharp crack of a frozen branch under the weight of snow, or the lonely, mournful cry of a distant wolf. The snows have come early this year, a thick, smothering, and unexpected blanket of white that has erased the paths, buried the landmarks, and turned the familiar forest into a strange and hostile labyrinth. And they have stayed late, clinging to the land with a cold, relentless tenacity, long after the stores of preserved food were expected to be replenished by a spring thaw that refuses to arrive. The hunt has failed. The great herds of caribou, the lifeblood of the people, have sensed the coming of this unnatural winter and have moved on. Their tracks are raced within minutes by the ceaseless, whispering snowfall. The smaller game, the rabbits and the grouse, have burrowed deep beneath the snowpack, hidden and scarce. The fish, the great pike and lake trout, lie dormant and unmoving in the black, frigid water beneath a thick, impenetrable layer of ice on the lakes. The carefully stored food, the dried meat, the rendered fats, the preserved berries meant to last until the thaw has long since run out. The world has become an endless, indifferent, and profoundly hostile landscape of two colors: the blinding, soul-leeching white of the snow and the stark, skeletal black of the frozen trees. The only movement is the wind. It howls through the pine boughs, a sound that, at first, is just the voice of the weather. But after weeks of gnawing, soul-crushing hunger, the sound begins to change. The human mind, desperate for meaning, for anything other than the stark, silent reality of its own impending demise begins to play tricks on itself. The howling of the wind starts to sound like a voice, a whisper, a malevolent, tempting suggestion on the very edge of hearing, a voice that speaks not of hope, but of forbidden, terrible solutions. This is the breeding ground of the Wendigo. The spirit itself is an elemental force, a personification of the winter's great, all-consuming, and impersonal hunger. It is the physical sensation of the cold that seeps into your bones, a cold so deep that it feels as though your very marrow is turning to ice, a cold that no fire can ever seem to warm. It is the visual metaphor of the profound emptiness of a barren, frozen forest, a world drained of life and color. It is the physical, twisting, cramping pain in your stomach that slowly, inexorably metastasizes into a madness in your mind. It is a spirit of pure, insatiable, and primordial want. It is the very concept of not enough given a spectral, predatory form. And it does not need to hunt in the traditional sense. It does not need to stalk or chase. It is patient. It is the winter itself, and it has all the time in the world. It knows that sooner or later, desperation will bring its victims to it. It knows that the human body can endure much, but the human spirit, when faced with the slow, agonizing, and certain reality of its own starvation, is a fragile thing. The curse of the Wendigo begins not with a bite or a scratch from a monster in the dark. It begins with a choice, a terrible, unthinkable choice, born from the absolute, ragged, and freezing edge of human survival. It begins when the community has been whittled down, when the last child has stopped crying, its energy spent, when the last elder has willingly given up their spirit to the cold, a final, selfless act to leave a little more for the others. It begins when two survivors are left, huddled together in a freezing shelter, looking at each other not with love or camaraderie, but with the hollow, haunted eyes of starvation, their own humanity slowly being eroded by the gnawing emptiness within. When a person, faced with this certain, agonizing death, succumbs to the ultimate human taboo, when they look upon the frozen, still body of their fallen companion, their friend, their brother, their own child, and see not a person to be mourned and given proper rights, but a source of sustenance to be consumed, they do more than just commit an act of cannibalism. They perform a dark, unintentional, and irrevocable ritual. They open a door within their own soul, a door that was meant to remain sealed forever against the ancient, hungry things of the world. And something that has been waiting patiently outside in the cold, something ancient and hungry, is invited in that moment of profound, world-shattering transgression, of consuming their own kind to survive, they invite the spirit of the Wendigo into their soul. The ancient, elemental hunger of the winter, which had until then been an external, oppressive force, now finds a warm, living vessel, and a horrifying, irreversible, spiritual and physical transformation begins. The person has survived the winter, but in doing so, they have become the winter. They have eaten, but they have invited an eternal, unappeasable hunger to live inside them forever. Their personal, temporary hunger has been replaced by a cosmic, eternal one. And the first meal has only made it stronger. Part 2. The fever and the change. The moment the taboo is broken, the moment the first terrible meal is finished, the survivor is no longer alone. A pact has been made, not with words, but with an act so profound it has altered the very nature of their soul. The spirit of the Wendigo, the ancient, hungry heart of the winter, has found a home. But the transformation is not instantaneous. It is a slow, insidious, and horrifying metamorphosis, a period of spiritual sickness that precedes the full, monstrous change. This is the stage the elders call Wendigo fever, a psychosis of the soul that is the final, tragic echo of the human being who once was. Let us imagine a survivor, a hunter named Kai. He has outlasted his companions, his family, by making the unthinkable choice. He has survived. He stumbles out of the forest as the first signs of a late, reluctant spring begin to appear. He is found by another hunting party, emaciated, frostbitten, and his eyes holding a new, terrible emptiness. He is brought back to his village, a ghost returning from a frozen grave. At first, there is relief celebration. A lost one has returned, but the celebration is short-lived. The people of the village, wise in the old ways, begin to notice the signs. Kai is different. The man who left filled with the camaraderie of the hunt has been replaced by a sullen, withdrawn, and unervingly silent stranger. He sits by the fire, but he does not speak of his ordeal. He does not weep for his lost companions. He simply stares into the flames, his gaze distant, as if watching a world no one else can see. His wife brings him a broth, a warm, nourishing stew made from the first small game of the spring. He pushes it away. It is not the food he craves. He begins to complain of an unnatural cold, a deep internal frost that seems to emanate from his very bones. Though he huddles by the fire, wrapped in the thickest furs, he shivers uncontrollably, his teeth chattering. His lips, the people notice with a growing dread, have taken on a pale, deathly blue tint, as if permanently stained by the frost. His skin grows waxy and pale like the flesh of a corpse. The Wendigo fever has him in its grip. His nights are plagued by terrible, vivid nightmares. He thrashes in his sleep, crying out in a language of his own, a mixture of his native tongue and a strange, hissing, whispering sound like the wind through frozen pines. If one were to listen closely to his fevered cries, they would hear him speak of endless, snow-covered forests where the trees have no leaves, of a black, swirling sky, and of a hunger, a great, gnawing, screaming hunger that is both a feeling and a living, breathing presence beside him in the dream. He begins to exhibit a strange and violent behavior. A child's laughter, once a sound of joy, now sends him into a silent, simmering rage. He is found one morning staring at the village's sled dogs, his eyes filled not with affection, but with a cold, calculating, predatory light. The dogs, sensing the change in him, no longer bark at his approach. They whimper and cower, their tails tucked between their legs. They can smell the winter that he now carries inside him. The village shaman, an old, wise woman named Kione, who has seen this sickness before, knows what must be done. She confronts Kai, her eyes filled with a deep, profound sorrow. "The spirit of the great hunger has you, my son," she says, her voice low. "You must fight it. You must let us help you." She and the elders perform the sacred rituals. They light fires of cedar and sweetgrass, the smoke intended to purify his spirit. They chant the ancient songs of warmth and community, trying to remind his soul of what it means to be human. They prepare a special, scalding hot tea made from bitter herbs, a medicine designed to burn the cold out of him. But it is too late. The spirit has taken too deep a root. During one of the ceremonies, as the shaman chants the names of his ancestors, Kai lets out a terrible, inhuman cry. He leaps to his feet, his eyes rolling back in his head, and speaks with a voice that is not his own. It is a dry, hissing, whispering voice, the voice of the winter wind itself. Hunger. It whispers from his lips. So, hungry, he lashes out, his strength unnatural, sending the elders sprawling. And then he flees, running from the village, from the fire, from the last vestiges of his own humanity, and disappears into the forest. Now, alone in the wilderness, the final, physical transformation begins. It is not a sudden, explosive shift. It is a slow, agonizing corruption, a stretching and a hollowing out, as if his very physical form is being remade to match the new, vast emptiness in his soul. He feels his bones begin to ache, then to stretch. His limbs elongate, growing to an unnatural skeletal length. His height increases not with the bulk of muscle, but with the gaunt, terrifying stature of a dead tree. His body becomes hideously emaciated, his skin stretching so tight over his now protruding bones that it takes on the appearance of a living corpse that has been recently dug up from the hard, frozen earth. His humanity is being stretched to the breaking point, a canvas being pulled taut over a new, monstrous frame. Despite this appearance of starvation, he is filled with a terrifying, supernatural strength and speed. He can now run with the speed of a blizzard, moving through the dense forest without making a sound, a silent, gray phantom against the snow. His face contorts. His mouth widens into a rictus grin, his lips, already stained blue, pulling back to reveal his teeth, which, in some tellings, begin to sharpen into jagged points, or in others, fall out to be replaced by them. His tongue, some stories claim, becomes long and pointed, a tool for licking the marrow from bones. And his eyes either sink deep into their sockets, glowing with a cold, malevolent and predatory light, or they are pushed out from the pressure of the transformation, becoming bloodshot and crazed with his new, singular, all-consuming purpose. He has lost the look of a human being. He now has the eyes of a predator consumed by a single, all-encompassing and eternal need. But the most terrible part of the transformation, the final piece of the curse, is the hunger. The man Kai is now a Wendigo, and he is afflicted with a hunger that can never, ever be sated. No matter how much he eats, the gnawing, screaming emptiness in his core only grows. It is a perfect metaphysical torture. And the only thing he now craves, the only thing that can momentarily quiet the screaming void inside him, is the one thing that cursed him in the first place: human flesh. He has become the physical embodiment of his own sin, forever seeking to fill a spiritual void that has become a painful, physical, and eternal reality. The fever has passed. The change is complete, and a new, terrible hunger now walks the winter woods. Part 3. The Contagion of Madness. The path to becoming a Wendigo, born from the desperate act of survival cannibalism, is a chilling and tragic one. It is a story of a human being pushed to the absolute limit, who makes a terrible choice and pays an eternal price. But there is another way, a way that is, perhaps, even more terrifying, for it does not require a physical transgression. It requires only the surrender of the human spirit. It speaks to the fragility of the mind itself when faced with an ancient, malevolent, and overwhelmingly powerful consciousness. This is the path of direct infection, the contagion of madness. For not all Wendigos are newly made. Some are ancient. They are the old ones, the spirits that have roamed the frozen northern forests for centuries, perhaps even millennia. They are the survivors of countless winters, their power and malevolence having grown with every victim they have consumed, with every soul they have tormented into submission. These are not just hungry beasts. They are master psychologists, entities of profound, predatory intelligence. And they have learned that there are more ways to create one of their kind than by simply waiting for starvation to do the work. They have learned to hunt not just the body, but the soul. Let us follow the story of a young hunter, a man named Anan, known in his village for his courage and his skill with a bow. He is on a solitary hunt, deep in the woods during the first, biting cold of a long winter. A sudden, unseasonable blizzard descends upon the forest, a storm of blinding, disorienting snow that erases the path behind him and leaves him utterly, hopelessly lost. For days he wanders, his meager rations dwindling. The cold is a physical enemy, stealing the warmth from his body. The silence of the snow-covered forest is a psychological one, pressing in on him, making him feel as though he is the only living thing left in a dead world. It is in this state of vulnerability, of isolation and growing fear, that he first feels its presence. It is not a sight or a sound at first. It is a feeling, the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stand up for no reason. He will spin around, his bow at the ready, only to see nothing but the endless, silent trees. But the feeling does not go away. It is a constant, low-level pressure on his mind. Then he sees it, just for a moment, at a great distance, moving between the dark trunks of the trees. A tall, impossibly thin, and unnaturally fast figure, gray against the white snow. It is there and then it is gone. He tells himself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, a deer, but his heart knows better. The ancient Wendigo has chosen him. The hunt has begun. But this is not a hunt of tooth and claw. It is a hunt of the mind. The Wendigo is toying with him, breaking him down, piece by agonizing piece. He will hear a sound, the snapping of a twig just behind him, but when he turns, there is nothing. He will find a single, large, and unnaturally deep footprint in the snow, a track that seems to begin from nowhere and end nowhere. He will hear his own name whispered on the wind, a dry, hissing sound that seems to come from all directions at once. Anan. His sanity begins to fray. He stops sleeping, afraid of what he might see if he closes his eyes. He is in a constant state of heightened alert, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. His own hunger begins to gnaw at him, and the whispers on the wind begin to change their tune. They are no longer just his name. They are suggestions. So hungry. The hunger is a strength. Anan. Eat. Be strong. One night, huddled by a small, dying fire, he finally succumbs to exhaustion and falls into a fitful, feverish sleep. And the Wendigo enters his dreams. It does not appear as a monster. It appears as a benevolent spirit, an ancestor from long ago. It shows him a vision of his village, warm and safe. And then it shows him a feast, a great, steaming platter of roasted meat, the most delicious food he has ever imagined. He can smell it, his starving body aching with need. Eat, the spirit in his dream says, its voice kind and reassuring. This is the only way. This is the secret of the forest. To survive, one must take the strength of others. Eat, and you will be strong enough to find your way home. You will be stronger than the winter. You will be a great hunter. Anan, in his dream, reaches for the meat. But as his fingers touch it, the vision shatters. The benevolent ancestor becomes the gaunt, terrifying form of the Wendigo, its eyes glowing with a cold, triumphant light. The feast becomes a platter of human limbs, and Anan wakes up screaming, his heart pounding, the taste of phantom, forbidden meat still on his tongue. The Wendigo is not just hunting him. It is teaching him. It is grooming him. It is slowly, methodically replacing his human thoughts of survival with its own monstrous ones. It is showing him the path, the choice, without him having to discover it for himself. The final stage of this psychological torture comes when Anan, his mind now a ragged ruin of fear and hunger, finally stumbles upon another human being. A lone trapper also lost in the storm. The trapper is weak, his leg broken, but he offers to share his last piece of dried meat with Anan. A month ago, Anan would have helped the man, would have shared his own strength. But now, as he looks at the trapper, he does not see a fellow human in need of help. The whispers of the Wendigo in his mind are now a roaring chorus. He sees only meat, He sees a solution to the terrible, gnawing hunger that has been planted in his soul. In that moment, his spirit finally breaks. He has not yet committed the physical act, but he has surrendered to the idea of it. His humanity flickers and dies, and the ancient spirit of the Wendigo, its long and patient hunt now complete, flows into him, claiming its new, willing vessel. He does not need to eat the man. His transformation begins right there, before the terrified eyes of the helpless trapper. Anan's body begins the slow, agonizing stretch. His eyes begin to glow with a new, cold light. He has become a Wendigo, not by a choice born of his own desperation, but by a madness that was carefully and cruelly inflicted upon him. The contagion has spread, and the forest now has another one of its hungry ghosts. Part 4. The Nature of the Beast. To truly comprehend the terror of the Wendigo, we must look closer at the creature itself, at the impossible and contradictory nature of its physical form. For the Wendigo is not simply a monster. It is a living, breathing paradox, a being whose very existence defies the laws of nature as we know them. The tales passed down by the Algonquin peoples are not just stories of a large, hungry beast. They are attempts to describe something that is both physical and spiritual, a creature that is both present and absent, a being whose form is a direct, horrifying reflection of the spiritual sickness that created it. Let us examine these profound and terrible contradictions, for it is here that we can truly begin to understand the unveiled nature of the beast. The first and most striking contradiction is that of its form versus its strength. The Wendigo is always described as hideously emaciated. It is a creature of impossible thinness. Its skin, often described as having a deathly ashen-gray pallor, is stretched so tight over its bones that it seems translucent, a thin layer of parchment over a skeletal frame. It looks as though it is perpetually on the verge of starvation, a walking corpse that has been denied a final, peaceful rest. Its protruding ribs, its sharp, bony shoulders and hips, all speak of a creature that is being consumed from within. And yet, this gaunt, skeletal being possesses a strength that is utterly supernatural, a strength that defies all physical logic. The stories tell of Wendigos that can tear a man limb from limb with their bare hands. They tell of creatures that can shatter the thick ice of a frozen lake with a single blow, or rip the heavy wooden door off a log cabin as if it were made of paper. This is not the strength of muscle and sinew. It is the strength of a spirit, the raw, untamable power of the winter storm itself, channeled through a physical, albeit withered, form. It is a chilling reminder that the danger of the Wendigo is not in its physical bulk, but in the ancient, elemental power that animates it. The second contradiction is that of its size. Many of the tales describe the Wendigo as being gigantic in stature, a creature that towers over the tallest of trees, its skeletal head brushing against the winter clouds. And there is a terrible metaphorical logic to this. The legend states that for every human victim the Wendigo consumes, it grows larger. But as it grows, its hunger also grows exponentially. The more it eats, the more it wants. The larger it becomes, the more emaciated it appears. It is a creature trapped in an endless, horrifying cycle of consumption and want, a physical embodiment of the principle that greed can never be satisfied, that it only creates a larger and more painful emptiness. However, other tales speak of its impossible stealth. It is a creature 15 feet tall, yet it can move through the dense, snow-covered forest without making a sound, without snapping a single twig. It can stalk a hunting party for days, remaining just out of sight, a silent, gray phantom in the periphery. How can a creature of such immense size be so silent, so unseen? This is because, as we have unveiled, it is not a purely physical being. It exists partially in our world, and partially in the spirit world, the realm of the Atusu. It can run with the terrifying, silent speed of the winter wind because, in essence, it is the winter wind. It can appear and disappear in the blink of an eye because it is a manifestation of the forest's own shadowy, disorienting, and malevolent nature. It does not always need to obey our laws of physics. It can step between the shadows. It can ride the howling gust of a blizzard. It can become one with the oppressive silence of a snow-filled night. This is what makes it such a terrifying hunter. It is not just a predator. It is a ghost with teeth. The very tracks it leaves are a source of contradiction and terror. Some stories say it leaves no tracks at all, gliding over the snow like a phantom. Others say it leaves deep, single-file tracks, as if it had only one leg, a sign of its unnatural, unbalanced nature. And often, these tracks are described as having a trail of blood in them, not from a wound, but as if the creature itself is weeping blood from its feet, a sign of its eternal, unending agony. And most terrifying of all, sometimes a hunter, finding these strange tracks, will follow them, only to realize with a dawning, chilling horror that as he has been following, a second set of tracks has appeared behind him. The Wendigo was not ahead of him. It has been silently stalking him the entire time. And its voice, the voice of the Wendigo, is a thing of nightmares. It is rarely described as a simple bestial roar. It is often a sound that is chillingly human, yet horribly wrong. Some say it can perfectly mimic the cry of a woman or a baby, a sound designed to lure a compassionate rescuer into a deadly trap. Others say its voice is a dry, hissing whisper, the sound of the wind through dead leaves, a voice that can carry for miles and seems to come from all directions at once. And some of the most frightening tales say that the Wendigo's true cry is a sound of profound, human-like agony and despair, as if the last, trapped remnant of the human soul inside the monster is forever weeping, forever screaming at the horror it has become. The nature of the beast, then, is not one of simple monstrosity. It is a collection of impossible, terrifying contradictions. It is a walking, skeletal famine, yet it possesses the strength of a giant. It is a towering behemoth, yet it moves with the silence of a falling snowflake. It is a physical creature of flesh and bone, yet it is a spirit that can walk with the wind. It is a mindless engine of pure hunger, yet it possesses a cunning and a psychological cruelty that is deeply, horribly intelligent. This is because the Wendigo is not a beast. It is a mirror. It is a reflection of the sin that created it. It is the physical manifestation of a spiritual sickness, a living, breathing, and eternally hungry symbol of what happens when a human being, in their desperation or their greed, sacrifices their own humanity. The beast is not just the monster that hunts you in the woods. The beast is the very real, very terrible, and very hungry ghost of the person it once was. Part 5. Tales of the Hunted. The stories of the Wendigo, passed down through generations in the warmth and relative safety of a longhouse during the deep, dark of winter, are not heroic epics. They are not tales of shining knights slaying a dragon for glory and treasure. They are grim, terrifying, and intimate survival stories, campfire tales designed not just to frighten, but to teach, to warn. They are harrowing accounts of encounters with this spirit of hunger, and they often end not in triumph, but in profound, soul-shattering tragedy and loss. Let us delve into one such tale, a story pieced together from the fragmented accounts of the Salto people, a story of a hunting party that went into the woods and came back different. The story begins with a hunting party of 7 men, led by a strong, respected, and deeply experienced hunter named Demi. It was a late autumn, and the signs of a long and brutal winter were already on the wind. The hunt was crucial. The survival of their village depended on the meat and furs they could bring back before the first, deep snows trapped them. They traveled for days, deep into the vast, silent wilderness of the north, following the tracks of a great herd of elk. But the forest was unusually quiet. The game was scarce. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. A sense of unease settled over the party. Demi, a man who knew the forest as well as he knew his own face, felt it most keenly. The air was wrong. One of the younger hunters, a man named Tansy, known for his quick temper and his great pride, began to grumble. He complained of the lack of game, of the biting cold, of the foolishness of their quest. He was the first to speak of a dark alternative. "If we find no elk," he said one night by the fire, his voice low and dangerous, "perhaps we will find something else to eat. We are all made of meat, are we not?" The other hunters fell silent, a chill crawling down their spines that had nothing to do with the cold. Demi rebuked him harshly. "Never speak such words," he commanded, his voice like the crack of a whip. "To speak of the taboo is to invite the spirit of it. You will bring a curse upon us all." Tansy fell silent, but he sulked, his eyes holding a new, resentful glint. The first seed of the Wendigo sickness, the seed of selfish greed, had been planted. Weeks passed. Their rations dwindled to almost nothing. The men grew weak, their ribs showing, their faces gaunt. The hunger was a physical pain, a constant, twisting knot in their bellies. It was in this state of desperation that they finally found a single, lone elk, old and sick, but still a promise of sustenance. They managed to bring it down. But the meat was not enough for 7 starving men to regain their full strength for the long journey home. That night, as the meager portions were being shared, Tansy, his eyes wild with a hunger that was now more than just physical, began to argue. He claimed his portion was too small, that as the strongest of the younger hunters, he deserved more. The argument escalated into a physical confrontation. In a flash of starving, desperate rage, Tansy struck one of the other hunters, a quiet man named Nodin, with the butt of his axe, killing him instantly. A horrified, absolute silence fell over the camp. The ultimate taboo had not been just spoken. It had been enacted. Demi and the others, though horrified, were too weak to enact justice. They could only watch in stunned silence as Tansy, his mind now clearly broken, committed the final unforgivable act. He began to butcher the body of his fallen comrade. That night, Tansy ate alone, huddled on the far side of the fire, his back to the others, a terrible, guttural, and inhuman sound of gnawing and slurping filling the night air. He had survived. He had feasted, but he had damned himself and all of them. The next morning he was gone. He had vanished from the camp, leaving behind only the grisly, scattered remains of his terrible meal. Demi knew they had to leave immediately. A Wendigo had been born in their midst. They began the long, desperate journey home, their hearts filled with terror. But they were being stalked. They would see him or what he had become at a distance. A tall, impossibly thin figure, moving with unnatural speed through the trees, always keeping pace with them, always watching. It was the form of Tansy, but stretched, elongated, its skin a deathly gray, its eyes glowing with a faint, cold light. One by one, the hunters began to disappear. A man would go to gather firewood and not return. Another would fall behind for only a moment and vanish from the path. There was never a sound, never a struggle, just a silent, terrifying erasure from the world. The Wendigo, their former companion, was hunting them, but it was a patient hunter. It was toying with them, feeding on their growing terror. Finally, only Demi, the leader, remained. He was old, he was weak, but he was wise. He knew he could not outrun the creature. He knew he had to make a stand. He found a small, defensible cave and prepared himself for the final confrontation. He built a great, roaring fire at the mouth of the cave, its light and heat the only weapon he had left. As night fell, the Wendigo came. It did not rush the cave. It circled it, its terrible, hissing whispers echoing through the darkness. "Demi, I am so hungry, old friend. Let me in. Share your warmth. Share your meat." Demi held his ground, his heart pounding, his axe held tight in his trembling hands. He screamed back at the creature, chanting the ancient words of protection, calling upon the spirits of his ancestors to give him strength. The Wendigo, enraged by his defiance, finally attacked. It burst through the flames, its gray skin seeming to ignore the heat, its claws like shards of ice. It was impossibly fast, impossibly strong. Demi fought with the last of his strength, but he was no match for the supernatural power of the beast. The creature tore the axe from his hands and threw him to the ground. It loomed over him, its gaunt face a nightmare mask of the friend he once knew, its eyes burning with a cold, dead light. And in its final moment, as the Wendigo's jagged teeth descended towards his throat, Demi saw something in those terrible eyes. It was not just hunger. It was a flicker of something else. A profound, eternal, and inescapable agony. The spirit was a monster, but the man trapped inside it was in hell. This tale, and others like it, served as a powerful warning. The Wendigo was not just a story. It was a very real, and very present, danger in a world where a single harsh winter could push any man, no matter how strong, to the absolute brink of his own humanity. Part 6. The Unspoken Cure. The tales of the Wendigo are not just stories of a monster. They are chronicles of a spiritual disease. And like any disease, the people who lived under its shadow developed a grim and necessary understanding of its treatment. The methods for dealing with the Wendigo were not heroic quests for glory. They were solemn, often tragic, and deeply ritualized procedures, acts of spiritual medicine born from generations of hard-won, sorrowful experience. The only way to defeat a creature born of a broken taboo was with a strict adherence to a different, more powerful set of sacred laws. The first and most crucial step was diagnosis. Recognizing the Wendigo fever in a person before the final physical transformation was complete was the most effective, though most heartbreaking, way to deal with the threat. The community, ever watchful in times of hardship, learned to see the subtle, terrifying signs. It was in the way a survivor of a starving party would refuse nourishing broth, their eyes glancing instead at their living companions with a strange, speculative light. It was in their constant complaints of an internal, spiritual cold that no fire could warm. It was in their sullen withdrawal from the community, their silent refusal to join in the songs and stories that bound the people together. It was in the nightmares that made them thrash and whisper in a dry, hissing voice that was not their own. When these signs were confirmed, the community, with heavy hearts, knew they had to act. They had a brief, precious window of time before the spirit consumed the person's humanity entirely, before the physical change began and the monster was fully born. In some cases, if the infection was new and the person's will was still strong, a powerful shaman, a midwife, or a shaking tent seer could attempt a spiritual intervention. This was a grueling, multi-day ordeal. The afflicted person would be isolated in a special lodge, away from the rest of the village. The shaman would enter a trance state, his own spirit journeying into the borderlands between the worlds to confront the Wendigo spirit that was trying to claim the victim's soul. The lodge would be filled with the sacred smoke of cedar, sage, and sweetgrass, a purifying smog to drive out the cold, intrusive spirit. The shaman would chant for days without rest, his voice growing raw, calling upon the aid of benevolent spirits, the Manitous, and the person's own ancestors to help in the fight. The afflicted person would be given scalding hot, bitter teas, concoctions of special herbs, designed to physically burn the spiritual cold out of their body. It was a battle fought on two fronts, the spiritual and the physical. Sometimes, rarely, it would work. The community would witness a great, final convulsion, a terrible scream from the victim, and then a sudden, profound calm. The fever would break. The cold in their soul would recede. The person would collapse, weeping, their humanity restored, though they would forever be scarred by the memory of the terrible hunger that had almost claimed them. But more often than not, the spirit's hold was too strong. The person was too far gone. And in these cases, the community was faced with a terrible, unspoken choice. They had to perform a ritual execution. This was not an act of anger or vengeance. It was a sorrowful, necessary act of spiritual medicine. It was seen as both an execution of the monster and a mercy killing for the human being still trapped inside, to free them from the horror they were about to become. The task would often fall to a close family member, a brother, a father, a husband, to prove that the act was done out of love and sorrow, not out of malice. The afflicted person would be given a final ceremonial meal. Then, as they slept, the chosen executioner would enter the lodge. The death had to be swift, but this was not the end of the ritual. The body could not be buried. To bury it would be to risk the Wendigo spirit reanimating it, or worse, escaping back into the forest to find a new host. The body had to be completely and utterly destroyed. It was carefully dismembered, the limbs separated from the torso, and then it was burned in a great sacred fire, a fire that had to be kept roaring until nothing remained but ash and calcified bone. The community would watch over the fire, chanting and praying throughout the long night, ensuring that every last piece was consumed, ensuring that the spirit had no physical anchor to which it could cling. It was a funeral for a person who had died long before their body had. But what of a fully formed Wendigo, a creature already transformed and stalking the forest? This was a far more dangerous proposition. To hunt a Wendigo was often seen as a suicide mission. But sometimes, when a community was being terrorized, when its hunters were being picked off one by one, a group of the bravest warriors, often led by a powerful shaman, would have to take on the task. They knew that conventional weapons were often useless against the creature's supernatural speed and strength. Their strategy relied on fire. They would prepare great, pitch-soaked arrows, and their goal was not to kill it with a single shot, but to set it ablaze. The hunt was a terrifying ordeal of psychological warfare. The hunters would have to endure the creature's maddening whispers, its illusions, its terrifying, silent stalking. But if they could corner it, if they could drive it into a place where it could not easily escape, and if they could successfully light it on fire, they had a chance. The Wendigo, a being of pure ice and cold, would shriek in agony as the flames consumed its gaunt form, its spirit finally being driven out by its elemental opposite. But the ultimate cure, the only way to be absolutely certain that the Wendigo spirit was defeated forever, was to destroy its frozen heart. In the rare event that a hunting party managed to kill the physical body of a Wendigo, often through a clever trap or an immense, coordinated effort, the shaman's work was not yet done. He would have to perform the most dangerous ritual of all. With a sacred obsidian knife, he would have to cut open the creature's chest. Inside, he would not find a heart of flesh and blood. He would find a solid, jagged chunk of ice, often glowing with a faint, cold, malevolent light. This was the physical anchor of the spirit. The shaman would have to retrieve this heart of ice, handling it with special, consecrated tongs, for its touch was said to burn the skin with a freezer burn that could never heal. He would then have to immediately place it into the hottest part of a sacred, roaring fire. The heart would not melt like normal ice. It would fight back. It would let out a terrible, high-pitched scream, the sound of the spirit itself being unmade. It would hiss and spit, releasing a foul-smelling, black smoke. The hunters would have to stand guard, for it was said that other, lesser, hungry spirits were often drawn to the energy released by the heart's destruction. They would have to keep the fire roaring, feeding it with sacred wood and chanting prayers of protection until the heart of ice was completely gone, until its last, dying scream had faded into the winter air. Only then was the spirit truly defeated, its connection to the physical world severed, and its tormented, hungry essence finally, mercifully, released from its curse. This was the unspoken, terrible, and necessary cure for the sickness of the winter. Part 7. The Sorcerer's Folly. The Wendigo, as we have unveiled, is a creature born of desperation, a spiritual plague that preys on the starving and the broken. The act of consuming human flesh is a terrible sin, but it is a sin committed at the very edge of survival, often when reason has already been clouded by gnawing hunger. But what if a man were to commit this ultimate taboo not out of desperation, but out of a hunger of a different kind? A hunger for power. This leads us to the most sinister and feared figure in all the Wendigo lore, the Wendigo shaman or sorcerer. These were individuals who, in their pride, their ambition, and their lust for power, believed they could control the spirit of the Wendigo without succumbing to it. They were not victims of the winter. They were men who sought to become the winter. They saw the supernatural strength, the terrifying speed, and the ghostly stealth of the Wendigo not as a curse, but as a source of immense, untapped power. And they were willing to sacrifice their own humanity and the humanity of others to claim it for themselves. Let us follow the dark path of one such sorcerer, a man named Chaitin. He was not a respected shaman of his village. He was an outcast, a man known for his jealousy and his dark ambitions. He envied the great hunters their skill, he envied the shaman his wisdom, and he envied the chief his authority. He believed he was destined for greatness, but that the world had conspired to deny him his rightful place. And so, he decided to take power by force, not by the force of arms, but by the force of a forbidden, ancient spirit. He knew the legends, he knew the taboo, but he did not fear it. In his arrogance, he believed he was strong enough to master it. He believed he could invite the hungry spirit into his soul and bend it to his will, to become a vessel but not a slave. His first act was one of cold, calculated murder. He lured a young hunter from a neighboring, rival village into the deep woods under the pretense of a shared hunt. There, in the cold silence of the forest, he killed him. He then performed the terrible ritual. He consumed the flesh of his victim, not with the desperation of a starving man, but with the cold, focused intent of a sorcerer performing a dark invocation. He was not just eating. He was inviting, summoning, opening the door of his soul and calling out to the ancient, hungry spirit of the place. And the spirit, ever waiting, answered. The transformation was different for him. Because he had invited the spirit willingly, his will was not immediately consumed. A terrible, unholy pact was formed. The first changes were not of the body, but of power. He found he could run faster than any man, that he could move through the forest without a sound. His senses became preternaturally sharp. He could hear a deer's heartbeat from a mile away. He could see in the dark as if it were day. The spirit had given him the tools he craved. He had become the greatest hunter in the region. He returned to his village not as an outcast, but as a new, powerful figure. He brought back more game than any other hunting party, and at first the village celebrated his newfound skill. But the elders, and the wise shaman Kione, watched him with a growing dread. They saw the changes. They saw the new, cold light in his eyes. They saw the way he no longer seemed to feel the biting cold of the winter. They saw the way he would sometimes look at the other villagers, at the children with a strange, speculative hunger. Chione confronted him. "You have made a pact with the great hunger," she said, her voice low and accusatory. "You have invited the winter into your heart. You are a danger to us all." Chaitin only laughed, a sound that was no longer fully human. "I am not a danger, old woman," he hissed. "I am power. I am the future of this village. I control the spirit. It does not control me. But the spirit of the Wendigo cannot be controlled. It is a force of pure, elemental, and infinite want." Chaitin's small human greed was like a single drop of water in an endless, thirsty ocean. The more he used the spirit's power, the more it demanded from him in return. The hunger began to grow beyond his control. The game he hunted was no longer enough. The whispers of the spirit in his mind grew louder, more insistent. It demanded its true food, human flesh. His first victim from his own village was a child who had wandered to the edge of the forest. Chaitin, using his supernatural speed, took the child without anyone seeing, and consumed him in the darkness of the woods. He told himself it was a necessary sacrifice, a small price to pay to keep his power, to keep the spirit placated. But the meal did not satisfy the hunger. It only made it stronger. He had now fully crossed the line, and the spirit's hold on him grew tighter. His physical form began the slow, inexorable transformation. He grew taller, thinner. His skin took on the ashen, gray pallor of the beast. The village was now in the grip of terror. They knew a monster was hunting them, and the wise ones knew it was one of their own. Chione and the village warriors knew they had to hunt Chaitin, to put an end to the horror he had become. But hunting a Wendigo shaman is far more dangerous than hunting a normal Wendigo. Chaitin was not a mindless beast. He still possessed his human cunning, his knowledge of the terrain, and his deep-seated malice, now amplified by the power of a primordial spirit. He was the ultimate predator. He led the hunters on a terrifying chase through the forest, using the Wendigo's power to create illusions, to mimic voices, to turn the hunters against one another. He was always one step ahead, a silent, gray phantom that they could never quite see, but whose presence was a constant, terrifying pressure. The final confrontation took place in a clearing during a raging blizzard, the snow and wind a physical manifestation of the spirit's power. Chaitin, now more monster than man, finally revealed himself. He was a towering, skeletal figure, his eyes glowing with a cold, hateful light. He had been a man. Now he was a god of hunger and death in his own terrible mind. The battle was a massacre. The warriors, brave as they were no match for his supernatural strength and speed. He tore through them, his claws like shards of ice. Only the old shaman, Chione, remained. She did not fight him with an axe, but with the power of her spirit. She held up her sacred medicine bundle and began to chant the ancient, powerful songs of banishment. Her voice a small, defiant point of warmth in the heart of the blizzard. For a moment, the creature that was Chaitin hesitated. The human part of him, buried deep inside, seemed to recognize the old songs. But the hunger was too strong. With a final, terrible roar that was a mixture of a man's scream and a winter's howl, he lunged at her. And so, the sorcerer's folly reached its terrible conclusion. Chaitin had sought power, but had only found an eternal, agonizing hunger. He had sought to be a master, but had become the ultimate slave. He had become the most powerful and most terrifying of all Wendigos, for he combined the supernatural strength and speed of the spirit with the cunning, cruelty, and black-hearted ambition of a human mind. And he was now lost to the forest, a new and terrible legend, a cautionary tale not of desperation, but of the far more dangerous hunger for power. Conclusion: the echo in the wind. And so, we are left not with the story of a simple physical beast, but with a chilling and profound psychological and spiritual portrait. The Wendigo is a story of the darkness that lies not in the deep, cold forest, but within the human heart itself. It is a story about the thin, fragile line between man and beast, between survival and monstrosity, between profound need and all-consuming greed. The creature, in all its terrifying forms, is a mirror. In the desperate survivor, it reflects the terrible choices we are capable of when pushed to the absolute brink. In the power-hungry sorcerer, it reflects the corrosive nature of ambition and the folly of believing we can control forces far older and more powerful than ourselves. The Wendigo is not an external evil that invades our world. It is an internal potential, a spiritual sickness that is invited in when our own humanity fails. When we are pushed to our absolute limits, when the comforts and laws of civilization are stripped away by the harsh, silent indifference of nature, what are we capable of? The legend of the Wendigo suggests that there is a line, a final sacred taboo, that once crossed, changes us forever, inviting a spiritual plague into our souls from which there is no return. It suggests that our humanity is a fragile thing, a warm, flickering fire in the midst of a vast, cold, and eternally hungry wilderness. And if we are not careful, if we allow the hunger of our own desperation, our own greed, our own selfish desires, to consume us, we risk becoming the living, breathing vessel for a hunger that is far older, far more powerful, and far more insatiable than our own. The howling of the wind on a cold winter night is, to the modern mind, just the movement of air. But to the Algonquin peoples it was a reminder, a warning, a cautionary tale whispered from the world of the spirits. It was the echo of the great, eternal hunger of the winter. It was the sorrowful, eternal scream of the human soul trapped within the monstrous prison it had created for itself. It was a reminder that the most terrifying monster is the one we have the potential to become. The Wendigo is not just a creature to be feared. It is a cautionary tale to be heeded, a profound and terrifying story that asks us all a single, terrible question. A question that echoes in the wind on the coldest and darkest of nights. When you are at your most desperate, what will you do to survive? And what part of your soul will you be willing to lose in the process? The coldest winters are not always outside of us, but within. And the most ravenous monsters are often born from the simple, desperate, and very human hunger to survive. Thank you for journeying with us into the frozen heart of this ancient and terrifying legend. If this unveiling of a primal spirit has chilled you to the bone, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to Mythos Unveiled, and hitting the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the heart of our most primal fears. What other folkloric creature do you believe is more of a spiritual sickness than a physical beast? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, be wary of the howling wind, and be even more wary of the hunger that resides within your own heart.